Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Rotary Club of York, the 22nd largest Rotary Club in the world. We apologize for starting a few minutes late today. We are experiencing a few technical difficulties. Hopefully we have those ironed out and we can get to the program momentarily. But as I mentioned last week, we have an opening song today, and I would like to turn it over to Glenn Miller, who will not lead our opening song, but will perform our opening song. Glenn.
Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. It's good to be with you. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesty, above the fruited plains. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea.
Thank you, Glenn. That was fabulous. Round of applause for Glenn, please. Glenn, thanks so much for doing that the first time for us, and we hope we can continue with the opening song here for the next few weeks as well. Okay, a couple quick announcements. As you probably know, all of our previous online meetings are available for viewing. If you go to our club Facebook page, you can find links to those videos, and those videos are posted on YouTube. Please take a look if you haven't had a chance to join us on these Wednesdays, or if you have other Rotarian friends who haven't been able to join us, please direct them to our Facebook page so they can watch our previous programs. And of course, this week's program will also be recorded and posted online soon after the meeting is over today. Today happens to be Earth Day, April 22nd, and it happens to be the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And of course, our club is very much connected to what we do locally here through our Preserve Planet Earth Committee. Many thanks to the committee for all of the years of tree planting, cleanups, and the various activities that they've done over the many years. And of course, that's a great segue into their current project, which is the Kiwanis Lake Improvement Project. We heard about that last week from Speaker Aaron Jacobs. And a quick reminder that next Friday, May 1st, is Give Local York Day. So if you can, please donate. You'll help out our project at Kiwanis Lake and help out our Preserve Planet Earth Committee. And what a greater reminder than today being Earth Day to do so. Another quick announcement and a reminder that the non-traditional student scholarship deadline is coming up on May 15th. That scholarship supports students who have not chosen the traditional path to school. Most of the time are people who have worked for several years and are going back to school for one reason or another. And our club is very lucky to be able to support those students. And please see Renee for specific details about the non-traditional student scholarship. And remember that the deadline is next week, or is on May 15th rather. And as I've done the last couple weeks, I'd like to do a local business spotlight today. And today I am highlighting Springwood Hospitality. This is the company that is owned by Rotarian Dave Hogue. Now, of course, Dave and Springwood Hospitality are in a tough business right now because travel, whether it's business or leisure, has really been curtailed. And about half of their hotels are currently open. Unfortunately, they've had to temporarily furlough a good portion of their staff, but the remaining staff that's on board is being able to meet the needs of all the hotels that remain open. A couple really cool things that they're doing during this COVID pandemic. Number one, their Home 2 Suites and Homewood Suites by Hilton are both open and operating here in York. And those two hotels are participating in the Hilton and American Express effort to donate 1 million rooms to frontline medical professionals. So those two hotels are hosting at no cost medical professionals who need the residence and lodging temporarily while they're either in town helping out or they're medical professionals who live here but don't want to go home after work because of risks to their family. The True by Hilton that Springwood Hospitality operates near the intersection of I-83 and Route 30 is temporarily closed, but through an agreement with their neighbor Enterprise Rent-A-Car, they have been able to use their parking lot at the True by Hilton for storage of many rental cars. And as you can imagine, Enterprise is also in a tough spot because car rentals have been way down as well. So they have a lot of cars that would normally be out and about that are no longer able to be out and about, and they're sitting in parking lots. And Springwood was able to donate their parking lot at the True by Hilton to Enterprise for a time so that they can use that for their car storage. And of course, Springwood is considered an essential business by the governor's regulations, but most of their employees are working from home just to be safe. So Dave, thanks for all you're doing for the community right now, and appreciate you being a member of our Rotary Club. And with that, I would like to turn over our presentation. Our speaker today is Jim McClure. Many of you may know Jim or may have heard Jim speak over the years. He's the former editor of the York Daily Record. And Jim, I would like to turn it over to you to present your program today.
Okay, thank you. I'm joining by phone here today, and I hope everybody can hear me. I hope everybody can see my screen right now. It's great to be here. I also want to thank Courtney for her behind the scenes work, and also wish her a happy birthday. You know, she's really doing wonderful things, you know, to make these broadcasts work. And so I really appreciate her. And Courtney, happy birthday. We're going to talk today for the few minutes we have on just some things that York County has run through in the past in terms of adversity and how we've responded, which is which is always a mixed bag, but in the end we've come through with very well. And one point I want to make is that we can look at these moments and we can gain strength from these moments that our forebears have been through these before. We've had a lot of these moments, and I'll explain why in a second. But really, we should appreciate the fact that we've gone through these moments like COVID-19, and we've come out the other side, in some cases stronger, and probably all cases stronger. And we want to go through this thinking about the lessons we can learn as we go. So be thinking about that as we go, because we'll have some questions at the end. I want to run through 5 moments, and you can see those on the screen, the 5 moments, and I'll go through these real quickly at first, and we'll revisit them, again very quickly. And I didn't go through these and finding these moments because of the fact they had a public health relationship, but as it turns out, they all do. And the first would be Continental Congress's visit to York in 1777-78. So we'll talk about that. That's coupled with the erection of camp security on today's Springersbury Township. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the Civil War and the fact that we had not only a training camp here with perhaps 10,000 Green recruits who are here in New York, we also had a military hospital here, and we had tremendous disruption during the Civil War. If you think about it, many communities don't have a relationship with both the Civil War and the Revolutionary War. Maybe most communities don't, but York does. So we had those 2 big events here, those 2 big traumatic events here. We also had, World War I, a big involvement in World War I, and then the Spanish flu pandemic that followed that. That was 1918, 1919. Then we had this tremendous trio, the Great Depression, a polio epidemic, and then World War II. You know, when you think about the coupling of these things, many communities went through them. York did, obviously, York County did. That these were major moments. Just imagine going through what we're going through now, and then 2 other moments, let's say, after that. And let's hope that doesn't happen. It shows a resilience to get through those. And then lastly, the York race riots in 68, 69, and Tropical Storm Agnes that followed 3 years later. So many other events involving public health, but we'll go through these. So the question is, why do we have so many crises? And I would say one reason is because of the fact of our geography and our age. If you think about it, we're the first county north of the Mason-Dixon line for a broad swath, and then we're the first county west of the Susquehanna in history, founded in 1749. So if you look at that York County's map at the upper left, that's York County today, but we tend to forget that York County went all the way to Franklin County, the top of the mountain past Gettysburg, up until the year 1800. So the map at the right will show you the swath of the Mason-Dixon line that we occupied before 1800, and it was something like 65 miles, which is about 30% of the Mason-Dixon line when the Mason-Dixon line was first drawn out. So a lot of stuff could happen to us because we had such a broad connection with the South, and this shows that connection. You can see York County runs from the Susquehanna River, which is a little hard to point out, but you can see it. It extends from the Chesapeake Bay all the way to Franklin County. That's our border. So, we're a large county, we're a populous county, we're a border county and a border state where North meets South. I'll just read this. We're a keystone state between Northeast and Southeast. We're the midmost of the Mid-Atlantic states, and we're between the large northern city of Philadelphia and the large southern city of Baltimore at the time of the Civil War. So you can see geography meant that a lot of events moved through here, a lot of complexity moved through here. And so, so a lot of things happened, like the Revolutionary War involvement and the Civil War involvement, just for starters. And we'll just talk about each of these again with a little bit more detail. The American Revolution, of course, Continental Congress came here for 9 months in 77, 78. The men were away, the women were running the businesses, farms, and households. We had 64 statesmen here, congressmen here, plus their staffs and so on. And that meant scarcity of food, it meant high prices, and the women had to scrounge for what's left. I have a quote there, which is one of my favorite stories about the statesman Timothy Pickering, who stayed in a house here in Newark, the Widow Mimmons house, and she worked the entire time he was there at her spinning wheel, obviously working for herself or making sure she was had food and clothing, but also I think doing working for the war effort as well. And then after all that, the British prisoners came in camp security and out in Spring Township, and just right out of the bat, a bad case of camp fever, typhus, erupted right in the camp. Now, many of those folks out at camp security were walking around on parole. They were on our streets, and so we had our first exposure, or an early exposure, to a pandemic or an epidemic, I guess, in that case. Then we moved to the Civil War, and I mentioned Camp Scott was formed for Green recruits on the then York Fairgrounds, which was at the southeast of King and Queen Street at the time. They had 10,000 there and another 14,000 at our military hospital on Penn Park. And you think about that type of population swelling that would happen. Who's going to provide for the hospital? There weren't trained, the doctors were in shortage just like in any wartime. So the women of town entered the public square, and many of the men were away at war. 600 would die and never come back. And so the women in town, many of the women became nurses. They were nurses for Camp Scott. They were nurses for the military hospital. And they also did other things such as creating bandages and so on. I love this quote about one of the nurses, a prominent woman in town, Cassandra Small Morse. She said, "I was terrified," her niece said about her. This was after she went down to Gettysburg and did other nursing work. She was terrified beyond all, didn't take her clothes off at night for more than a week, sat up in a chair, couldn't sleep at all, looked miserably, and never smiled. The Civil War caused great disruption in York, and so much family disruption that we needed an orphanage. And that's when the Children's Home of York went up right after the war. So you can see a lot going on in the Civil War. That could be a program in itself. Then we go to World War II and the Spanish flu. I know you've heard a lot about the Spanish flu in this recent moment, and the Spanish flu was just terrible. For one thing, we just got through a war. In a year, we lost 200 men, and one woman, Jeanette Sin, who was a YMCA worker, who is often counted among on monuments and so forth as a casualty of war. She probably died from the flu in Britain on her way over to help in the war effort. You know, the Spanish flu is believed to have killed 300 in New York City, and 6,500 were infected or affected in just in the city alone. And one interesting thing about this in many of these epidemics, that often the poor and minorities are adversely, disproportionately affected. And that was the case in just one brief study in 2 neighborhoods. 20 people in the Black community died from the Spanish flu in just a 2-week period. So, you know, you extrapolate that out, and those are just those that are buried in Lebanon Cemetery. So, you know, a terrible time there in World War I. But then we went into the roaring 20s and had an industry revved up again, and the rest is history there. We're going to talk, I'm not going to spend much time on the race riots and the Tropical Storm Agnes. Would just say that the riots from a public health point of view were very difficult. I mean, we had deaths, we had many wounds and many injuries. Peter Levy has said, just for population, York's revolt may have been the most severe of the era in terms of violence. In terms of Tropical Storm Agnes, you know, we know that in times of great floods, that you have the flood, then you have the recovery period, which is often referred to as a second disaster. So that was both of those moments coming quickly in proximity to each other were a difficult time, as we know. I want to go back to World War II and spend a little bit more time there. I know that polio is a major initiative, is a major initiative with Rotary, and I just want you to realize the good that York Rotary and other Rotary clubs have done when you see some of these numbers here and some of the complexities of polio, then I hope you go away feeling like you did something, which you clearly have. So we have the Great Depression. Often the Great Depression, you'll read that York wasn't affected much by the Great Depression because we had diversity of industries and so on. But what is often, that is just relates to York. What about the surrounding countryside? And there's been work done that shows that York County suffered greatly, banks closing, things like that, as the rest of the country did. Then we had the polio outbreak in 1941, the summer and early fall of 1941. And you can see the numbers, 9 dead, more than 93 cases, and 48 of those cases were crippling cases. Not to unduly make comparisons of this terrible moment we're currently in, I think our county numbers right now are something like 13 dead and 550 who have been afflicted with COVID-19. So you can see the comparables here. This came in World War II. We had 570 dead and many more wounded. So this was a time of great disruption. Great sorrow. I want to describe, sometimes it helps to put a face on victims, which, because of HIP and other things, we aren't able to do as well today. But then I'll just show 3 cases very quickly, as it relates to the polio epidemic in 1941. And this is a case that shows that how epidemics are unpredictable and arbitrary. And this is a case where we had 2 twins, one survived, the other one died, and which was it shows the arbitrariness of disease. And also notice here, this just is a snapshot, this P.G. Blevins, who was a father of none, was stricken. I believe he survived, but you can see, how illness affected a family, large families of the day. This is a case involving the infant, polio-affected infants. And this was a case of an 18-year-old, a Black infant who was the 90th person, the first known case involving a Black person remember there's more than 90, about 94, 95. So, you know, it struck me in reading this and preparing for this, just how they really did track race and ethnicity even in those days, and tracked it pretty well. They knew when they had the first black case of a black person. And it was interesting, there's a discussion, there's some idea that maybe people in the black community wouldn't be affected by polio, but that happened. And as you can see, also you can see here that the polio cases are coming to York, which is the next thing we'll talk about very quickly. In polio cases, in all polio cases of the time, they would move very fast. And this was a case of this young girl who died after 10 hours after she was stricken. So time was really of an essence in treating polio, and in the ways that they could treat at the time. One was through the use of an iron lung. As it turns out, in York, there was an ongoing battle, an ongoing debate at the time about whether there should be an isolation hospital or isolation wing to York Hospital. And that started in the early 1920s after the Spanish flu, and 20 years later, they were still talking about, you know, how do we get this isolation wing? How do we build it? How do we do it? So we were halfway through the epidemic of 1941, and Doc Yeagley, who was the public health director at the time, was still trying to get an isolation wing. The idea was that the hospital couldn't accept any polio patients that's contagious. So Harrisburg had facilities, they had the iron lungs up there, so we would ship our those afflicted severely up to Harrisburg, and then we just saw how important time was. So so it took time to get them up there and treated and so on. So there was a major controversy about that right in the middle of the epidemic. They finally got an isolation wing or designated space in the hospital, got iron lungs in. And by 1947, we still didn't have a permanent isolation wing. The Campbell Chain Company family came forward and said, we're going to put up some money, let's build this. And they did, and opened in 1949. So I want to just really go through these local lessons, and at least some of them anyway, that we're short on time, of course. And just want to run over some of these and think about these as they relate to COVID-19. And I think the first point is we're simply going to experience bad moments just because of our geography, if nothing else. And we can't over-prepare because of that in our work, in our families, and personally. And the second thing is, just as we saw in that polio epidemic, there's going to be national policy, national political differences, but locally, you know, if we can take care of some of these differences in advance, it could be more productive when a crisis happens. In the case of the polio isolation wing or the disease isolation wing, we didn't take care of that, and it ended up causing death and delay. So that's something to think about, is where are we weak in our relationships in peacetime, so we'll be ready when the next crisis hits. And there will be a next crisis. Point number 3, just real quickly, is I think sometimes we do glorify World War II and maybe other wars as a time that we pull together, and as opposed to COVID-19 where we're all apart, we're not together. And I would just tell you that if you look at history, every war has caused contention and controversy and differences. In World War II, we had rampant prostitution, venereal disease. We had black market operating here. We had the stealing and cheating on food stamps. If the papers had that stuff too during World War II. So I don't know if we can take solace in that, but we just need to realize that wars are messy, disease epidemics are messy. It doesn't mean that we should settle for that. We can do better, but it's just a point that we should keep in mind. At this moment in our community, we're going, point number 4 there, we're going through a kind of a decentralization of our leadership. And that has its good points and its bad points. In World War II, of course, the men at the right in that picture were the ran the industries in town, and so therefore they could run the war effort. They had a lot of clout, and if they wanted to get something done, they could get it done. I don't know that we're arranged today that way, and maybe that is good, but it's just a point that we need to be aware of. And as we go to what I'm suggesting, and point number 5, can we have a community-wide public review after COVID-19 and just find out what worked and what didn't work in the community? I think a lot of it's working really well, but you know, how can we improve on that? And so that might be something that we should call for. We should ask for is a charrette or some type of community gatherings or hearings, so we can collect what you know, what worked well and what didn't work well. And the last point is something, just a point to leave us on, and in our business and in our lives, what can we draw from this crisis to improve ourselves on the other side? Maybe it has to do with our things that we can learn at home, our relationships at home. Maybe it could be opportunities that we find in business that we can further, you know, our businesses from things that we learned, you know, during a crisis. I know at the Daily Record, we would often talk about that. You know, when I was editor there, we would go through these things, and we would really look back and try to plan for the next thing and see what we can learn to move our whole process ahead. And that's exactly what, in closing, that's exactly what P.H. Gladfelder did. And this was 1897. Of course, he had his lumber company in Spring Grove up and running, and he was investing in York Manufacturing, which is today known as Johnson Controls, a major air conditioning and refrigeration manufacturer. And he discovered in 1997 that he discovered in a very difficult way that that refrigeration was a way of the future, because typhoid claimed 3 of his children. Typhoid came from the fact that ice, which was a way of chilling things in those days, was contaminated and caused typhoid. So he saw that, and he invested and got what was then known as York Manufacturing Company. He brought in the Shipleys and Thomas Shipley in particular, and we have Johnson Controls today because of that, because he saw through his personal loss how important refrigeration and air conditioning are. So he went and invested in that, and so there's an example. What can we learn from this crisis? What can we take home? What can we apply? So that's my my quick story, and I wonder if there's any questions or comments.
I'm getting President Josh back on the line. Here we go, President Josh.
Thank you, Jim. Really appreciate the presentation. Courtney, do we have any questions at this point for Jim?
None have come through so far, so if anybody has any questions, please type them in.
While we wait for some questions to come in, Jim, do you want to just touch briefly on your perspective of the COVID situation in York and the media coverage of it and what you're seeing out there?
Yes, I think that this is just trying to observe. I look at it really hard. I think that that Mayor Halford is doing a really good job of being a loud voice and informing, and now you know, publishing things in Spanish. So that is that's something that we learned that we needed to do that, and I think that'll be something that will transcend this. You know, this epidemic, is the fact that we need to communicate better to the Latino population. I think that we need loud voices, effective voices on a countywide level as well. I don't hear those as much. Maybe I'm just missing them, but I think that those are needed, particularly in a decentralized structure, community structure like we have today. I think the county level is a way to cover all 900 square miles of York County in a way that the city can, of course. So that's something I think that we need to work on. I think that our numbers, you know, we've lost 13 folks. It's terrible, but compared to other counties, it looks like we're doing a lot of things right, and I think we just need to keep being smart about that.
Okay, next question. How are you enjoying retirement?
Thank you. it's great because I can do the fun stuff. I can write and do things like this. And talk about journalism. I do a lot of stuff in journalism still on the state level and things like that. But I don't have to do the hiring, firing, and training and all the block and tackle work that is so difficult, and including trying to lead a newsroom or a whole company through something like this. My hat's off to you all who are doing that, and I know what the load it is to lead like that. And I just want to encourage you. I hope that what you just saw is encouragement after all that we went through, after these major moments that we went through. The community is a great community today, so we can get on the other side of this and really prosper.
Okay, next question. Did we do better in crisis in the past with a centralized county government?
Yeah, that's something that we should look at, because centralization, we could see that the centralization didn't work in the 1941 polio epidemic, because the county commissioners really, who had the key to that decision, or at least a big key to that position, wouldn't allow it. It may have been because of cost, but they wouldn't allow it. So centralization has its downside. On the other, decentralization is messy. It takes more communication, as we know. It takes more time, and you can't move as fast. So there might be, in a time like this, a hybrid type of structure where we have a task force of with an intentional planning, that when we go into these modes, that we have a task force made up of, in advance of these key players who can act quickly. I think that there may be a blend that might be helpful going forward, and that's why we need to really look at this, how we did in this pandemic, and see what we can learn.
How do you envision the community reviews happening after this is over?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that there should be a series, so we hit all areas, and I think they should be public. I think that so that everybody can be invited, and we should get their input. I think we can learn a lot from the neighborhoods, from people in the neighborhoods, and out in the suburbs who are going through this, who can tell us firsthand kind of how they fared. So I don't know how to quite organize a series, but that blend of groups that I talked about before, the commissioners, the mayor, the public health officials, we need to find a way to bring them all together and have them all there to as we try to discover how we prepare for the next one. I do wonder sometimes, because we have two competing hospitals, how that works. I haven't seen problems from that in this one, from where I sit, but I may not be seeing them. But I think there's got to be a way to bring both of them to the table as well.
Okay, next question. Can you reflect more about your thoughts on the leadership situation that led to the York plan versus the community leadership changes you see now?
Yeah, I spoke to that, a little bit. And the York plan at the time, if you would have like W.S. Shipley from York Manufacturing would have 5,000 people working for him, and so people listen to him. That day is past today. We don't have that, and we all know that, and we're doing things and doing pretty well to work against that, or to work in the aftermath of that. Okay. So I think that we're going to have to work harder to get things done, just because we are so decentralized. In those days, if someone wanted something done, they would say, okay, I'm going to put X amount $1,000 towards it. I'm going to, as the Campbells really did in terms of the isolation hospital, they put money towards that, and it got done. We're not situated like that as easily today, so we're going to have to do the Give Local York approach, where we're able to get 1,000 people giving $1 rather than one person giving 1,000. The long and short is we have to work harder to get things done, but there are some advantages to this decentralized structure. What if W.S. Shipley in World War I or World War II was wrong on something? Then we could go down a bad path. So there's advantages to both.
Okay. With how the media has changed to being instant 24/7 news on TV and social media versus in the past epidemics where folks relied on newspapers, do you think that this has improved or negatively impacted how the public reacts to a crisis?
I don't know quite how to get at that or where to start at that. That's a big topic. I do know that in 1941, we had two newspapers, and so we had two different voices, and so they were devoured and read. And now we have a more distributed approach. You have to read the paper, and there's also online and then media groups and so on. So I think that people have to work harder. In some ways, the news media situation has in some ways reflected what's happening in the community, where you have to get your news from hopefully the various daily record products, looking from the daily record point of view. But there's several products that you may have to use rather than just using one. So I think the cable news, I think you have to watch both Fox and CNN and try to be literate, use media literacy on your own to try to figure your way through the news today from a national perspective.
Okay, great. We have a bunch more questions. We're going to answer one more, and then those questions will be sent to you, Jim, to follow up individually after today's webinar. And the last question is, how can Rotary be the catalyst for the community conversation to dialogue post-COVID-19?
Well, I think that Rotary could be a convener. I think that given us your size, and you have been, and you need to will, and I'm sure you will continue to be a very important part of the community. And I think you have to be intentional about being a convener. You have to decide we're going to be a convener. And shouldn't be the only convener. There should be partners, a partnership that with maybe the hospitals and the city and so on. But who can bring, maybe Rotary could bring those groups to the table, and the county commissioners, all that. Maybe that is a role as a convener. Otherwise, it may be time passes, we get busy, we don't quite get back to it, and all these learnings. What will happen is everybody will do their own reviews, and there won't be a synthesis of all that unless we're intentional about that. So that's what I think Rotary can play a role of being a convener, but not necessarily the only convener.
Jim, thank you very much for your program today. We really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. And members, can we all give Jim a virtual round of applause, please?
Thank you.
All right, Jim, thanks so much. And in recognition of Jim's program today, we are going back to being able to give out books in honor of our speakers. And the book that we're presenting today in Jim's name is called The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. And we will get a book plate to you, Jim, via postal service, so you can sign it and send it back to us and we can get it in this book. And this book will be donated to the York Suburban Middle School Library. And I did want to mention that we are also going to go back and retroactively do the same thing for our previous speakers in the previous 3 weeks. So for Courtney's presentation on April 1st, we're going to have her sign a book plate in a book called I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erica Sanchez. For our program on April 8th, the book is The Next Great Polly Fink by Allie Benjamin. And for last week's program, the book is called Good Enough by Jen Petro Roy. And we will continue to do this as both with our opening song and our books. We're trying our very best to get back to normal here at the Rotary Club of York. Now, a quick wrap up. Jim had a great segue in his program today to our panelists next week. Next week, we'll be hearing from County Commissioner and fellow Rotarian Julie Wheeler, as well as fellow Rotarians Kevin Schreiber and Silas Chamberlain. And the three of them will present an overview of how the county is dealing with the COVID pandemic from both a governmental and an economic standpoint. So look forward to hearing from all three of our fellow members next week for a county-wide perspective. Until then, thank you to everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Be safe out there.